Marina Torres walked across the sun-bleached concrete of Sunset Beach Municipal Pool, her red Lifeguard whistle bouncing against her chest with each measured step. The Southern California morning was already promising another scorching day, but she barely noticed the heat radiating from the pavement. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation from 2 weeks ago that had shattered her world into 1,000 pieces. Administrative leave pending investigation, Chief Rodriguez had said, not even meeting her eyes as he slid the transfer papers across his desk. Pool duty, effective immediately. What they didn't know, what none of them suspected as they dismissed her as just another washed-up lifeguard, was that in 3 days, she would demonstrate a feat so impossible, so precisely executed, that it would expose secrets buried deeper than any government file. She would split a bullet on a razor blade at 500 yards, and in doing so, reveal that the woman they'd been mocking was once the military's most lethal precision shooter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted the Santa Monica Mountains in shades of gold, but Marina's attention was focused on the mundane reality of her new assignment. Pool duty. After 12 years of active service, after missions that officially never happened in places that didn't exist on any map, she was now responsible for making sure teenagers didn't run on wet concrete and that the chemical levels in a municipal swimming pool stayed within acceptable ranges. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she'd been operating in conditions where a single miscalculation could mean the difference between a successful extraction and an international incident. Now her biggest challenge was preventing Jimmy Martinez, age 7, from doing cannonballs in the shallow end. Her supervisor, Captain Luis Rodriguez, had made his position clear from day one. Listen, Torres, I don't know what kind of strings you pulled to land this assignment, but this is a serious facility. We maintain standards here, real standards. Not whatever passes for discipline in your previous ... situation. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran of beach patrol, a man whose sun-weathered face and perpetual squint spoke of decades spent watching over swimmers and surfers. He ran the municipal pool system with military precision, which might have been admirable if he hadn't made it clear that he considered Marina's presence an unwelcome disruption to his well-ordered world. The official reason for her transfer was operational restructuring following budget cuts to specialized units. But Marina knew the real story. Her last mission had gone sideways, not because of anything she'd done wrong, but because someone higher up had needed a convenient scapegoat when congressional committees started asking uncomfortable questions about unauthorized operations in classified locations. Politics and blame had a way of rolling downhill, and Marina had been standing at the bottom when the avalanche hit. She'd tried to fight it through official channels, of course. Filed appeals, requested hearings, demanded access to the after-action reports that would vindicate her decisions. Every request had been denied, every appeal dismissed, every avenue of redress blocked by classification stamps and bureaucratic stonewalling. The message had been clear: accept the transfer quietly, or face formal charges that would destroy not just her career but her freedom. So here she was, trading a sniper rifle for a pool skimmer, watching over day campers and senior citizens doing water aerobics while the skills that had made her legendary slowly atrophied from disuse. The pool complex itself was impressive, she had to admit. Olympic-sized swimming pool, separate diving, well, kiddie pool with colorful water features, and a state-of-the-art filtration system that kept everything crystal clear. The facility served 3 local schools, 2 summer camp programs, and a community recreation center that stayed busy. From dawn to dusk, Marina's assigned station was Tower 3, positioned at the deep end where most of the serious swimmers did their laps. It was good placement for observation. She could see the entire pool from her elevated position, but it also made her feel like a museum exhibit. Every day, the same faces would look up at her with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. New. Girl's kind of intense, she'd overheard one of the regular swimmers saying to his buddy. Sits up there like she's watching for enemy submarines or something. His friend had laughed. Probably takes herself too seriously. You know the type thinks. Lifeguarding is some kind of military operation. If only they knew, Marina had thought, adjusting her sunglasses to hide the bitter smile that threatened to betray her composure. The other lifeguards treated her with polite professionalism that barely concealed their skepticism. Tommy Walsh, a college kid working his way through UCLA, was friendly enough but clearly saw her as someone playing at being important. Sarah Kim, the head lifeguard, was more direct in her assessment. Look, I don't know what your deal is, Sarah had said during Marina's second week, but this isn't whatever job you had before. Here, we watch the water, we follow protocols, and we don't freelance. Think you can handle that? Marina had nodded politely, swallowing the urge to mention that she'd spent the last decade handling situations where freelancing was often the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Instead, she'd simply replied, I understand the protocols. But understanding protocols and accepting them were different things entirely. Marina found herself constantly analyzing the facility's security vulnerabilities, noting sight lines and potential threat vectors with an eye trained by years of operational experience. She cataloged the regular visitors, identified patterns in their behavior, and maintained situational awareness that went far beyond what pool safety required. It was professional habit, ingrained so deeply that she couldn't turn it off even when watching 8-year-olds practice their backstroke. The weekends were the worst. That's when the facility filled with families, teenagers, and recreational swimmers whose casual attitudes toward safety made Marina's teeth ache with suppressed frustration. They ran on wet concrete despite clearly posted signs. They dove in shallow areas. They left their children unattended while they chatted on their phones. And through it all, Marina sat in her tower, watching and waiting and slowly burning with the knowledge that her skills were being wasted on pool maintenance and sunscreen renders. It was during her third week that she first noticed the activity at the adjacent Sierra Vista shooting range. The facility was separated from the pool complex by a chain-link fence and about 200 yards of scrub brush. But Marina's trained ear could pick out the distinctive crack of rifle fire even over the sounds of splashing water and children's laughter. Sierra Vista was a private range that catered to serious shooters, competitive marksmen, law enforcement personnel, and military contractors who needed facilities capable of handling precision work at extended distances. Marina had driven past it dozens of times during her commute, noting the expensive vehicles in the parking lot and the professional-grade equipment visible through the gate. From her lifeguard tower, she could see shooters moving between firing positions, setting up elaborate rifle systems and electronic monitoring equipment. Her fingers would unconsciously twitch, muscle memory recalling the feel of a properly balanced weapon and the satisfying precision of a perfect trigger break. But those were thoughts she couldn't afford to entertain. That life was over, buried under classification stamps and bureaucratic betrayal. Now she was just Marina Torres, municipal lifeguard, keeper of pool chemicals and enforcer of no running policies. The irony was that she was actually good at the job, despite her overqualification. Her observational skills, honed by years of scanning hostile environments for threats, made her exceptionally effective at spotting potential drowning situations before they became emergencies. Her calm under pressure, developed through countless high-stress operations, allowed her to handle pool emergencies with a level of professional competence that impressed even Sarah Kim. "You're weird," Tommy had told her one afternoon, "but you're really good at this. It's like you see everything that's happening before it happens." If only he knew the training that had gone into developing those skills, The life or death situations where failing to see everything could result in consequences far more serious than a scraped knee or hurt feelings. As Marina settled into her tower for another day of watching swimmers and testing chlorine levels, she allowed herself a moment of bitter reflection. 6 months ago, she'd been conducting precision operations in environments that would challenge the most elite military units. Today, her biggest concern was making sure the lane rope stayed properly positioned, but she was a professional trained to adapt to any environment and complete any mission assigned to her. If they wanted her to be a lifeguard, she'd be the best damn lifeguard the facility had ever seen. Even if it meant slowly dying inside, one perfectly maintained pool cleaning cycle at a time. The morning progressed with typical mundane efficiency. Lap swimmers arrived for their morning routines, the kiddie pool filled with day camp participants, and Marina dutifully recorded water temperature and chemical readings in her logbook with the same precision she'd once used to document wind speeds and atmospheric conditions for 1,000-yard shots. But change was coming, though she didn't know it yet. In 3 days, a simple conversation with a visiting marksman would set in motion events that would shatter her carefully maintained anonymity and force her to confront the truth about who she really was beneath the lifeguard whistle and municipal uniform. For now, though, she was just Marina Torres, watching over swimmers in the California sunshine, keeping her secrets buried as deep as her specialized training would allow. The 4th week brought a heat wave that turned the pool deck into a furnace and shortened everyone's temper, including Captain Rodriguez's. Marina watched from Tower 3 as he stormed across the facility, clipboard in hand, looking for problems to solve and people to blame. Torres. His voice cut across the water like a whip crack. Get down here. We need to discuss your performance metrics. Marina climbed down from her tower with measured steps, noting the way other staff members suddenly found urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. In her operational days, she'd learned to read the political weather as carefully as atmospheric conditions, and right now, storm clouds were gathering. Rodriguez waited by the equipment shed, his face flushed with heat and irritation. Beside him stood Jake Brennan, the facility's part-time maintenance supervisor and full-time know-it-all. Brennan was a former Army mechanic who'd parlayed 4 years of motor pool experience into an inflated sense of his own military expertise. He treated the pool facility like his personal kingdom and Marina like an unwelcome intruder. We've been reviewing your incident reports, Rodriguez began, consulting his clipboard with theatrical precision. 3 weeks, 0 safety violations. Documented. Either you're not paying attention, or you think you're too good to do the actual work. Marina kept her expression neutral, a skill perfected through countless briefings with hostile commanders. I document what I observe, sir. The swimmers have been following safety protocols. Brennan snorted with derision. Right, because pools run themselves, and people never break rules when nobody's watching. He gestured toward the busy swimming area where dozens of people were enjoying the afternoon session. Look at this place. You telling me you don't see anything worth writing up? The challenge was obvious, designed to put Marina in an impossible position. If she started documenting minor infractions, she'd be seen as petty and overzealous. If she continued reporting honestly, they'd use it as evidence of incompetence or negligence. I maintain appropriate vigilance, Marina replied carefully. My primary focus is preventing drowning incidents and ensuring patron safety. Your primary focus, Rodriguez said with rising irritation, should be following the established protocols that have kept this facility running smoothly for 15 years. We don't need some outsider coming in here thinking she can reinvent procedures that work. Marina bit back the response that threatened to escape. In her previous life, she'd developed and implemented protocols for situations where failure meant international incidents and body counts measured in friendly casualties. Pool maintenance procedures weren't exactly challenging intellectual territory. Jake Brennan was just getting started. "You know what I think?" he said, loud enough for nearby staff to hear. "I think our new lifeguard is one of those wannabe types. Probably watched too many action movies and thinks this job is more exciting than it actually is." Several of the younger staff members chuckled appreciatively. Marina recognized the dynamic immediately. Brennan was establishing dominance by humiliating the newcomer in front of an audience. It was playground psychology dressed up in adult professional clothes. "Jake's got a point," Rodriguez continued. "This isn't some elite military unit, Torres. It's a municipal pool. We need people who understand that reality and can work within it." Tommy Walsh had paused his lane rope maintenance to listen, his expression uncomfortable but fascinated. Sarah. Kim was pretending to focus on her equipment checklist, but Marina could see her attention was fixed on the conversation. Even the swimmers in the nearest lanes had gone quiet, sensing drama. "Speaking of military," Brennan said with a cruel smile, "I heard you had some kind of service background. What did you do, work in a mess hall, supply depot?" "Let me guess, administrative. Support, right?" The laughter that followed was sharp and mean-spirited. Marina felt the familiar cold anger begin to build in her chest. The same controlled fury that had carried her through impossible missions when politicians and bureaucrats had tried to micromanage tactical decisions from air-conditioned offices thousands of miles away. "Various assignments," she replied, using the same deflection that had become second nature. "Standard rotation duties." "Standard rotation," Brennan repeated mockingly. "That's military speak for I filed paperwork and emptied trash cans." He turned to Rodriguez with exaggerated concern. "Captain, maybe we should double-check her certifications. I mean, if she couldn't hack it in the military, what makes us think she can handle pool safety?" Rodriguez nodded seriously, as if this was a legitimate concern rather than workplace bullying disguised as professional skepticism. "Good point, Jake. Torres, I want you to schedule a recertification exam for next week. Better safe than sorry." The humiliation was systematic and deliberate. Marina recognized the pattern from her military experience. The slow squeeze of institutional pressure designed to make unwanted personnel quit voluntarily. It was easier than formal disciplinary action and avoided uncomfortable questions about fairness or due process, but Marina had survived worse than bureaucratic harassment. She'd endured interrogation by hostile intelligence services, operated for weeks behind enemy lines with compromised communication, and completed missions that had been written off as impossible before she'd even begun them. A few small-minded pool administrators weren't going to break her dot as the group dispersed. Marina caught fragments of conversation that stung more than she cared to admit. The words followed her as she climbed back to her tower, each comment designed to chip away at her dignity and professional identity. Completely useless in any real emergency. Double quotes. Probably couldn't handle actual pressure. Double quotes. Just another failed military wannabe. From her elevated position, Marina could see the shooting range next door, where serious marksmen were setting up for afternoon practice sessions. The contrast was painful over there. Precision and expertise were valued and respected. Here, competence was suspect and experience was something to be mocked. She watched through her binoculars as a group of shooters prepared for what looked like long-range precision work. Their movements were professional and economical, the kind of efficiency that came from extensive training and practical experience. These were people who understood the difference between life-and-death accuracy and casual recreational shooting. One of the shooters caught her attention, a woman in military fatigues whose bearing suggested active duty rather than veteran status. She moved with the fluid confidence Marina remembered from her own operational days, checking equipment with the methodical precision that serious marksmanship demanded. For a moment, Marina allowed herself to imagine walking through that gate, introducing herself to professionals who would understand her background and respect her capabilities. People who knew the difference between a qualified operator and someone playing dress up with military terminology. But that world was closed to her now, sealed off by classification stamps and bureaucratic betrayal. She was trapped in a role where her expertise was not only unrecognized but actively mocked by people who couldn't begin to understand what she'd sacrificed in service to her country. The afternoon wore on with typical routine, interrupted by the usual minor emergencies. A scraped knee from running on wet concrete, a minor argument over lane usage, and the endless task of maintaining chemical balance in water that seemed determined to drift toward unsafe levels despite her careful monitoring. As closing time approached, Marina began her end-of-shift procedures with the same systematic thoroughness she'd once brought to post-mission equipment checks. Every task was completed with precision that went unnoticed and unappreciated by supervisors who valued compliance over competence. But as she secured the last of the safety equipment and prepared to leave for the day, Marina noticed something that made her pause. The shooting range was still active despite the late hour, and the sound of rifle fire had taken on a different quality, the sharp crack of precision weapons being pushed to their maximum effective range. Through the fence, she could see spotters with high-powered optics calling corrections while shooters adjusted their positions for follow-up shots. This wasn't casual recreational shooting. This was serious marksmanship training, the kind conducted by people who understood that accuracy at extreme range required not just equipment and technique, but the mental discipline to perform under pressure. Marina felt the familiar ache of longing settle in her chest like a physical weight. This was her world, her language, her calling, and she was trapped on the wrong side of a chain-link fence, reduced to watching others practice skills she'd mastered years ago in places these weekend warriors couldn't imagine tomorrow would bring. More of the same, more mockery, more professional humiliation, more slow erosion of her dignity and self-worth. She was a legend forced to hide behind a lifeguard whistle, a master marksman reduced to checking pool chemical levels, a highly trained operative trapped in a role designed to waste her talents and break her spirit. But as Marina walked toward the parking lot, clipboard tucked under her arm like a shield, she felt something stirring deep inside her chest. It was anger, yes, but something more than that. It was the competitive fire that had made her legendary in communities these people had never heard of. The driving need to prove herself that had carried her through the darkest moments of her career. They thought she was nobody. They thought she was weak, incompetent, unworthy of their respect. In 3 days, if the opportunity arose, she might just show them how wrong they were. The 5th week brought an unexpected disruption to the pool's routine when Captain Rodriguez announced that the facility would be hosting a special event. The annual Southern California Public Safety Training Conference was being held at the PATH nearby convention center, and several law enforcement agencies had requested access to the pool for their water rescue certification programs. "This is our chance to show what a professional operation we run here," Rodriguez announced during the Monday morning staff meeting. "I want everything perfect. No mistakes, no shortcuts, and definitely no embarrassing incidents that might reflect poorly on this facility." His eyes found Marina as he spoke, the implication clear. She was the weak link, the potential source of problems that might undermine the facility's reputation during this high-visibility event. Jake Brennan was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of showcasing his authority in front of visiting professionals. "Captain, I'll make sure all the equipment is inspection ready. We can't have these people thinking we run some kind of amateur operation." Marina listened to the planning discussions with growing interest. The visiting agencies included SWAT teams, Marine patrol units, and specialized rescue squads from across the region. These were serious professionals who would recognize competence when they saw it and incompetence when they encountered it. More importantly, She noticed that several of the agencies had requested access to the adjacent Sierra Vista shooting range for their marksmanship qualifications. The two facilities would be operating in coordination for the first time since Marina had been assigned to pool duty, creating an opportunity she hadn't anticipated. As the morning progressed, advance teams from various agencies began arriving to survey the facilities and coordinate logistics. Marina watched from Tower 3 as professionals moved through the area with the kind of purposeful efficiency she remembered from her operational days. One group particularly caught her attention, a Marine Patrol unit from San Diego whose members moved with the fluid confidence of people comfortable in multiple environments. Their team leader, a woman with sergeant stripes and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, was conducting a detailed inspection of the pool's safety equipment. "Excuse me," the sergeant called up to Marina's tower. "I'm Sergeant First Class Emma Chun, San Diego Marine Patrol. Mind if I ask you a few questions about your emergency response protocols?" Marina climbed down to meet her, noting the way Chun's eyes tracked movement around the pool with professional awareness. This was someone who understood that vigilance was more than just watching, it was analyzing, anticipating, and preparing for contingencies that might never occur. "I'm Marina Torres, head lifeguard for this station," Marina replied, using her official title despite its recent nature. "What would you like to know about our protocols?" Chun consulted a checklist, but Marina could see her attention was focused on evaluating the person rather than just gathering information. Emergency response times, coordination with local paramedics, evacuation procedures for different scenarios. Standard stuff, but I like to verify everything personally. As they walked through the facility, Marina found herself explaining procedures with a level of detail that seemed to surprise Chun. She covered not just the official protocols but the tactical considerations that informed emergency response site lines, access routes, equipment positioning, and communication redundancies that weren't part of standard lifeguard training. "That's very thorough," Chun observed, making notes on her clipboard. "Most facilities stick to the basic requirements. You seem to have thought through contingencies that aren't in any manual I've seen." Marina felt a flicker of professional pride, quickly suppressed. "I believe in being prepared for any situation." "Military background?" Chun asked casually, but her tone suggested more than casual interest. "Some experience with emergency response," Marina replied carefully. Chun nodded slowly, her expression suggesting she'd heard similar non-answers before. "Well, whoever trained you did a good job. This is one of the most comprehensive safety setups I've encountered." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jake Brennan, who approached with his usual swagger amplified by the presence of visiting professionals. "Sergeant Chun, I'm Jake Brennan, Facility Maintenance Supervisor," he announced, extending his hand with theatrical confidence. "I trust Torres here hasn't been boring you with unnecessary details. We like to keep things simple and efficient." Chun shook his hand politely, but Marina noticed her expression had grown cooler. "Actually, Ms. Torres has been very informative. Her analysis of your emergency protocols is quite sophisticated." Brennan's smile faltered slightly. "Well, we do train our people thoroughly, though some of them have a tendency to overthink simple procedures." He glanced meaningfully at Marina. "Sometimes basic competence is more valuable than theoretical knowledge." The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable, designed to undermine Marina's credibility with a visiting professional. Chun's expression grew thoughtful as she processed the dynamic playing out in front of her. "I see," Chun said neutrally. "In my experience, thorough preparation usually correlates with effective performance under pressure." Before Brennan could respond, the conversation was interrupted by sounds from the adjacent shooting range, the distinctive crack of high-powered rifles, and the electronic beeping of timing equipment. Through the chain-link fence, Marina could see shooters setting up for what appeared to be precision competitions. That's the Sierra Vista Range, Brennan explained to Chun. They cater to serious marksman competitive shooters, law enforcement, military contractors. High-end facility for people who take their shooting seriously. Chun nodded with obvious interest. My unit has qualifications scheduled there this afternoon. Long-range precision work, mostly. It's one of the few facilities in the region that can handle shots beyond 300 yards. Marina felt her pulse quicken despite her efforts to remain calm. Long-range precision shooting was territory she knew better than anyone present, but acknowledging. That knowledge would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Must be nice to have the budget for that kind of training, Brennan said with a trace of envy. Most of us have to settle for basic qualifications at indoor ranges. The training is essential, Chun replied seriously. When you're dealing with water rescues in hostile environments, precision shooting can be the difference between mission success and casualties. Our team specializes in scenarios where standard approaches won't work. As Chun spoke, Marina found herself analyzing the shooting positions visible through the fence with professional interest. The range was set up for extreme distances, with targets positioned at what appeared to be 400, 500, and even 600-yard markers. This wasn't casual recreational shooting. This was serious marksmanship training for professionals who understood. That accuracy at extended range required not just equipment and technique, but the mental discipline to perform under conditions that would break most shooters. Torres seems interested in the shooting, Brennan observed with mocking amusement. Maybe she's thinking about taking up a new hobby. The comment was designed to belittle, to reduce Marina's obvious knowledge to casual curiosity. But Chun was watching Marina's face with sharp attention, noting the way her eyes tracked movement on the range with professional interest rather than amateur fascination. Have you done much shooting, Miss Torres? Chun asked carefully. Marina felt the weight of the question, aware that her answer could reveal more than she intended. Some recreational experience, she said finally. Basic familiarity with firearms. Recreational, Brennan repeated with barely concealed scorn. That's what they all say. Everyone thinks they're a marksman until they try to hit something smaller than a barn door at any real distance. Chun's expression had grown more thoughtful, her professional instincts clearly engaged. Distance shooting is definitely specialized work. Most people don't appreciate the complexity involved in environmental factors, ballistic calculations, the mental discipline required for consistency. Marina nodded without thinking, then caught herself. But Chun had noticed the automatic response, the way Marina's body language had shifted into professional interest, despite her verbal restraint. Well, Brennan announced with finality, I'm sure Sergeant Chun has more important things to discuss than theoretical marksmanship. Torres, shouldn't you be getting back to your tower? The afternoon swimmers will be arriving soon. The dismissal was pointed in public, designed to reinforce the hierarchy and put Marina back in her assigned place. But as she climbed back to Tower 3, Marina noticed that Chun was still watching her. With obvious curiosity, the afternoon brought the first wave of visiting professionals to the pool facility, and Marina found herself under subtle scrutiny. From people who understood the difference between genuine competence and administrative theater. These were serious operators who recognized expertise when they encountered it, and several seemed puzzled by the disconnect between Marina's obvious knowledge and her assigned role. But it was the activity at the shooting range that held her real attention. Through her binoculars, she could see precision shooters setting up for extended range work, their movements professional and economical. These were people who understood her true language, her actual area of expertise. As the day drew to a close, Marina felt the familiar ache of longing mixed with growing frustration. Tomorrow would bring more professionals to the facility, more opportunities for her expertise to be dismissed and mocked by people who couldn't begin to understand what they were witnessing. But change was coming, though she didn't know it yet. In 2 days, a casual conversation about marksmanship would escalate into a challenge that would force her to choose between maintaining her cover and defending her professional integrity. And when that moment arrived, Marina Torres would discover that some secrets were too powerful to remain buried forever. The second day of the training conference brought heavier foot traffic and higher stakes as specialized units from across Southern California converged on the facility. Marina watched from Tower 3 as tactical teams, marine rescue specialists, and federal agents moved through coordinated training exercises that reminded her painfully of her former life. Captain Rodriguez was in his element, strutting around the facility with clipboard in hand, micromanaging every detail with the intensity of someone desperate to impress visiting dignitaries. His anxiety was palpable, manifesting in increasingly harsh criticism of staff members who failed to meet his suddenly elevated standards. "Torres!" His voice cracked across the pool deck like a whip. "What's the chlorine reading on the main pool?" Marina consulted her logbook, a document she maintained with military precision despite its mundane purpose. 7.2 parts per million, sir. Well within acceptable parameters. Acceptable isn't good enough today, Rodriguez snapped, loud enough for nearby visitors to hear. I want everything perfect. Retest the levels and document everything twice. We can't afford any mistakes with these people watching. The public reprimand was designed to establish Rodriguez's authority while undermining Marina's credibility, but she'd endured worse from hostile commanders in actual war zones. She simply nodded and began the unnecessary retesting, aware that several professionals were observing the interaction with interest. Jake Brennan materialized beside Rodriguez like a predator sensing weakness. "Captain, I noticed some irregularities in Torres's equipment maintenance logs. Might want to double-check her work before the afternoon demonstrations." Marina felt her jaw clench involuntarily. Her maintenance records were flawless, documented with precision that exceeded facility requirements by significant margins. But Brennan's allegation planted seeds of doubt that would be difficult to disprove quickly. "What kind of irregularities?" Rodriguez demanded, his voice rising with stress-induced paranoia. "Missing signatures on some forms, incomplete environmental readings, general sloppiness that could reflect poorly on our standards," Brennan replied smoothly, producing a folder thick with fabricated documentation. Marina recognized the tactic. Immediately death by paperwork. Bureaucratic sabotage designed to overwhelm the target with administrative minutiae while undermining their credibility through manufactured evidence of incompetence. "I maintain complete records according to established protocols," Marina said evenly, producing her own logbook. "Every entry is properly documented and verified." Brennan dismissed her evidence with a wave of his hand. "Easy enough to backdate. Entries when you realize you're being reviewed. The question is whether we can trust someone who cuts corners when she thinks nobody's watching." The accusation of falsifying records was serious enough to warrant investigation, and Marina could see Rodriguez calculating the political ramifications of having a potentially dishonest employee exposed during a high-visibility event. "We'll discuss this later," Rodriguez decided, but his tone suggested the discussion would not be favorable to Marina. "For now, I want you staying in your assigned area unless specifically directed otherwise. No unauthorized interaction with visiting personnel." The restriction was clearly designed to isolate Marina from professionals who might recognize her competence and question her assignment to mundane duties. But as she returned to Tower 3, Marina noticed that Sergeant Chun was watching the exchange with obvious disapproval. The morning progressed with increasing tension as Brennan found new ways to undermine Marina's credibility. Equipment she'd maintained perfectly was suddenly declared substandard. Reports she'd filed accurately were questioned for missing details. Even her uniform appearance became subject to criticism that bordered on harassment. "Look at this," Brennan announced to a group of visiting instructors, holding up one of Marina's incident reports. 3 weeks on the job and 0 safety violations documented. Either she's not paying attention, or she thinks pool safety is beneath her professional dignity. The instructors examined the report with professional interest, but Marina could see that several were more impressed than critical. A 0 incident record over 3 weeks suggested competence rather than negligence, especially at a facility handling hundreds of swimmers daily. Maybe she's just good at prevention, suggested Officer David Park from the LAPD dive team. In my experience, the best safety personnel prevent problems rather than just documenting them after they occur. Brennan's expression darkened at having his narrative challenged. Or maybe she doesn't understand what real safety work looks like. There's a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical experience. What's your background, Torres? Park asked directly, ignoring Brennan's obvious irritation. Your safety protocols are more sophisticated than standard certification programs typically cover. Marina felt the familiar tension of walking a tightrope between maintaining her cover and defending her professional integrity. Various emergency response training, she replied carefully. I believe in thorough preparation. Various training, Brennan repeated mockingly. That's what they all say when they want to sound more qualified than they actually are. But Park was studying Marina with professional interest, noting details that Brennan missed. The way she scanned the pool area with systematic precision, her unconscious positioning to maintain maximum visual coverage, the economical efficiency of her movements when responding to minor incidents. You military? Park asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Marina felt multiple gazes focusing on her, professional operators analyzing her response for tells that would reveal more than her words. Some service experience, she admitted, using her standard deflection. Branch? Park pressed, clearly sensing there was more to the story. Before Marina could respond, Brennan jumped into the conversation with obvious relief at having an opportunity to discredit her further. Does it matter? Half the people claiming military experience these days never saw anything more dangerous than a training exercise. Stolen valor is everywhere now. The accusation of stolen valor was a serious charge in professional circles, designed to destroy credibility completely while making any defense appear self-serving. Marina felt the cold anger building in her chest, the same controlled fury that had carried her through impossible missions when politicians questioned her competence from the safety of air-conditioned offices. But it was Sergeant Chun who spoke. First, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to cutting through bureaucratic noise. That's a serious allegation, Mr. Brennan. Do you have evidence to support it, or are you just speculating? Brennan's confidence wavered under direct challenge from a federal agent. I'm just saying that claim should be verified. Too many people exaggerate their backgrounds these days. Agreed, Chun replied coolly. So what's your military background? Since you seem to be the expert on identifying authentic service. The silence that followed was uncomfortable for everyone except Marina, who recognized the tactical questioning that separated serious professionals from posturing administrators. Brennan's earlier claims about his Army experience suddenly seemed less impressive under scrutiny from someone who understood the difference between actual service and inflated resume entries. I served honorably in logistics support, Brennan said defensively. 4 years maintaining vehicle fleets in garrison environments. Chun nodded politely, but her expression made clear that she understood the hierarchy of military service and that motor pool maintenance didn't qualify Brennan as an expert on combat operations or specialized training. Ms. Torres, Chun said, turning back to Marina with renewed interest. I'd like to continue our conversation from yesterday about emergency protocols. Would you be available after the afternoon session? The request was phrased as a question, but Marina recognized it as what it actually was, an opportunity to interact with a professional who might understand her true background. It was also a subtle challenge to the restrictions Rodriguez had imposed on her contact with visiting personnel. "I'll make myself available," Marina replied, aware that she was crossing a line that might have consequences. Rodriguez had been listening to the exchange with growing anxiety, clearly torn between his desire to control Marina's interactions and his reluctance to openly contradict a federal agent's request. "Sergeant Chun, I'm sure Torres would be happy to help, but she has significant duties that require her attention," he said carefully. "Perhaps one of our more senior staff members could assist you instead." "I specifically want to speak with Ms. Torres," Chun replied firmly. "Her knowledge of your protocols has been quite impressive." As the group dispersed, Marina felt the weight of multiple crosscurrents pulling at her carefully maintained anonymity. Professional operators were beginning to notice the disconnect between her assigned role and her obvious competence. Brennan and Rodriguez were escalating their efforts to discredit her before uncomfortable questions could be asked. And somewhere, in the background, the shooting range continued its precision training that reminded her daily of the skills she was forbidden to use. The afternoon would bring new challenges as the conference shifted into high gear, training exercises that would put her knowledge and restraint to the ultimate test. And tomorrow would bring the moment when all her careful deception would finally collide with the truth she'd been hiding. Change was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The third day of the training conference dawned with ominous changes that Marina noticed immediately upon arriving at the facility. Her equipment locker had been moved to a storage closet behind the maintenance shed, forcing her to carry everything she needed across the entire complex. Her shift schedule had been altered without notice, placing her on duty during the conference's most high-profile demonstrations. Most telling of all, Jake Brennan was waiting by her assigned tower with a manila folder thick enough to suggest serious bureaucratic warfare. "Morning, Torres," Brennan said with predatory satisfaction. "Captain Rodriguez wants to see you in his office before you start your shift. Something about irregular documentation and potential policy violations." Marina recognized the escalation immediately. After yesterday's confrontation with visiting professionals, Brennan and Rodriguez had clearly decided to accelerate their campaign to discredit her before more uncomfortable questions could be raised about her background and capabilities. Rodriguez's office was cramped and overheated, dominated by motivational posters about teamwork and safety that seemed to mock the petty bureaucratic drama playing out beneath them. The captain sat behind his desk with the manila folder open, examining documents with theatrical concern while Brennan hovered nearby like a vulture waiting for carrion. "Torres, we need to discuss some serious discrepancies in your work," Rodriguez began, not looking up from his paperwork. "Missing incident reports, incomplete safety logs, and what appears to be falsified chemical readings over the past 2 weeks." Marina felt her stomach tighten with familiar cold anger. She'd maintained her records with military precision, documenting every detail with accuracy that exceeded facility requirements by significant margins. The allegations were fabricated, but disproving them would require access to backup documentation that had conveniently disappeared. "Sir, my records are complete and accurate," she replied evenly. "I can provide verification for every entry if needed." Brennan stepped forward with obvious satisfaction. That's what someone would say if they were trying to cover up sloppy work. "The question is whether we can trust documentation that might have been altered after the fact." The accusation of falsifying official records was a serious charge that could result in termination and potential criminal prosecution. Marina understood the tactical position: perfectly deny the allegations and appear defensive, or provide detailed explanations that would only dig the hole deeper. "I maintain my logs according to established protocols," she said carefully. "Every entry is contemporaneous and verified through standard procedures." Rodriguez finally looked up from his folder, his expression suggesting he'd already reached his conclusions. Torres, the pattern here suggests either incompetence or deliberate negligence. Neither is acceptable in a facility responsible for public safety. Through the office window, Marina could see the morning's training exercises beginning on the pool deck. Specialized units were setting up equipment for water rescue demonstrations, while federal agents observed and evaluated their techniques. These were serious professionals who would recognize competence when they saw it and incompetence when it was manufactured for political purposes. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, several staff members have expressed concerns about your attitude and cooperation. There are questions about whether you're suited for this type of work environment. Marina recognized the final phase of institutional harassment, the manufactured consensus that justified predetermined conclusions. Anonymous complaints from unnamed sources that couldn't be challenged or disproven, creating a narrative of general unsuitability that would justify any disciplinary action. What specific concerns? She asked, though she already knew the answer would be vague and unverifiable. Brennan consulted his own notes with obvious pleasure. Lack of team cooperation, resistance to established procedures, general attitude problems that affect facility morale. The charges were carefully crafted to be impossible to refute directly while painting a picture of someone whose very presence was disruptive to smooth operations. It was character assassination dressed up in bureaucratic language, designed to destroy credibility while avoiding specific allegations that might be challenged. I've completed all assigned duties according to established standards, Marina replied, maintaining professional composure despite the provocation. My safety record speaks for itself. Your safety record, Rodriguez said with rising irritation, consists of 0 documented incidents over 3 weeks. That suggests either incredible luck or someone who doesn't understand the reporting requirements. Marina felt the familiar surreal quality of being criticized for competence, while incompetence was rewarded. In her previous life, 0 incidents would have been celebrated as exceptional performance. Here, it was evidence of failure to do her job properly. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Sergeant Chun entered without waiting for permission, her bearing suggesting someone accustomed to having her presence acknowledged rather than questioned. Captain Rodriguez, I need to speak with Miss Torres about this afternoon's water rescue demonstration, Chun announced, her tone making clear this wasn't a request. There are specific safety protocols that require her input. Rodriguez's face flushed with embarrassment at being interrupted during disciplinary proceedings, but he couldn't afford to alienate a federal agent conducting official business at his facility. Sergeant Chen, we're in the middle of an important personnel discussion, he said carefully. Perhaps Ms. Torres could meet with you after we've resolved these administrative matters. Chun's expression remained professionally neutral, but Marina could see the sharp intelligence behind her eyes taking in every detail of the situation. The closed-door meeting, the thick folder of documentation, Brennan's obvious satisfaction, the elements added up to a pattern that experienced investigators recognized immediately. What kind of administrative matters? Chun asked with deceptive casualness. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Brennan, clearly uncomfortable with having their disciplinary theater exposed to outside scrutiny. Routine performance evaluation. Standard documentation review. I see, Chun replied, her tone suggesting she understood exactly what kind of evaluation was taking place. Ms. Torres, after we finish our discussion, I'd like you to walk me through your emergency response protocols. The Federal Evaluation Team has some specific questions about your facility's preparedness. The request was phrased as routine business, but Marina recognized it as what it actually was: professional cover that would extract her from hostile administrative proceedings while providing opportunities for more detailed conversation about her background and capabilities. Of course, Sergeant, Marina replied. I'll be available as soon as Captain Rodriguez concludes his review. Rodriguez found himself trapped between his desire to continue the disciplinary proceedings and his reluctance to keep a federal agent waiting for what he'd claimed were routine administrative matters. Political calculation warred with personal animosity as he weighed the potential consequences of either choice. "We can continue this discussion later," he decided finally. "Torres, report to your assigned station and await further instructions regarding these documentation issues." As Marina left the office, she could feel the weight of unresolved conflict pressing against her shoulders. The morning's confrontation had escalated the bureaucratic warfare to levels that would be difficult to sustain indefinitely. Something would have to give, and soon. The pool deck was buzzing with activity as specialized training units prepared for complex water rescue scenarios. Marina took her position at Tower 3, noting the way visiting professionals moved with purposeful efficiency that reminded her painfully of her own operational background. But it was the activity at the adjacent shooting range that captured her real attention. Through the chain-link fence, she could see precision marksmen setting up for what appeared to be extreme distance shooting trials. Their equipment was professional grade, their movements economical and practiced, their focus absolute. These were her people, practitioners of the deadly art she'd mastered in places most of these conference attendees couldn't imagine. They understood the mental discipline required for precision under pressure, the countless hours of practice needed to achieve consistency at extended range, the difference between recreational shooting and life-or-death accuracy, and she was trapped on the wrong side of a fence, reduced to watching others practice skills she perfected years ago while bureaucrats questioned her competence to maintain chemical balance in a swimming pool. As the morning progressed, Marina felt the familiar tension building in her chest, the same controlled fury that had carried her through impossible missions when politicians and administrators had tried to micromanage tactical decisions from the safety of air-conditioned offices thousands of miles from actual danger. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't dealing with hostile foreign agents or battlefield conditions that justified extreme measures. This time, she was facing petty bureaucrats whose primary weapons were paperwork and procedural harassment. The question was whether she could continue to absorb their attacks indefinitely, or whether the fire that had made her legendary would finally burn through the constraints that kept her silent and invisible. Change was coming, and Marina Torres was about to discover that some secrets were too powerful to remain buried forever. The breaking point came during the afternoon's most prestigious demonstration, when visiting dignitaries and federal evaluation teams gathered to observe advanced water rescue techniques. Marina watched from Tower 3 as specialized units coordinated complex scenarios while cameras documented everything for training archives and promotional materials. Captain Rodriguez was in his element, narrating the demonstrations with theatrical enthusiasm while positioning himself prominently in every photo opportunity. Jake Brennan hovered nearby, managing equipment with exaggerated precision designed to showcase his indispensability to visiting officials. But it was the concurrent activity at the Sierra Vista shooting range that would change everything. A group of federal agents had set up for advanced marksmanship qualifications, and their conversation carried clearly across the fence separating the two facilities. "Challenge round today," announced Agent Sarah Mitchell, a FBI countersniper whose reputation preceded her throughout law enforcement circles. "We're looking at precision shots beyond 400 yards with environmental complications that simulate real-world scenarios." Marina's attention sharpened involuntarily as she watched the agents prepare their equipment. These were serious professionals whose training and experience commanded respect throughout the tactical community. Their weapons were custom precision systems worth more than most people's annual salaries, maintained and configured by experts who understood that accuracy at extreme range was both art and science. "What's the challenge target?" asked Agent Tom Bradley, whose D credentials included Extensive tactical shooting experience in hostile environments. Mitchell smiled with obvious satisfaction. Razor blade mounted vertically at 500 yards. The goal is to split a .308 bullet cleanly down the middle, creating 2 impact points on either side of the blade. The challenge was legendary among precision shooters, a feat so difficult that only a handful of marksmen worldwide had ever accomplished it under controlled conditions. The margin of error was measured in fractions of inches, requiring not just perfect accuracy, but absolute consistency in every aspect of shot execution. Marina felt her pulse, quickened despite her efforts to remain calm. She'd accomplished that exact shot twice during her operational career, once in training and once during a mission where splitting a tripwire sensor had been the difference between successful infiltration and catastrophic exposure. "Impossible shot," declared Jake Brennan, who had approached the fence to observe the federal agent's preparations. "Nobody can hit a target that precise at that distance. It's pure luck if anyone even comes close." His voice carried across the pool deck with typical arrogance, drawing attention from both the agents and the water rescue demonstration. Several visiting professionals paused their activities to listen as Brennan continued his commentary. "I did some shooting in the Army," he announced loudly. 4 years of experience, multiple qualifications. Trust me, what they're attempting is physically impossible with current technology." Agent Mitchell looked up from her rifle preparation with obvious amusement. "Is that so? What makes you such an expert on precision shooting?" Brennan puffed up with wounded pride. "Like I said, military experience. I know the limitations of standard equipment and human capabilities. That shot they're describing is Hollywood." "Nonsense." Marina watched the exchange with growing tension, recognizing the familiar pattern of overconfident amateurs, dismissing achievements they couldn't comprehend. In her operational days, she'd encountered similar attitudes from support personnel who confused proximity to real operators with actual expertise. "Care to make a friendly wager?" Mitchell asked with predatory satisfaction. "I'm willing to bet that someone on this range can make that shot." Brennan's eyes lit up with the prospect of easy money and public vindication of his expertise. "You're on. $100 says nobody hits that target cleanly." "Make it interesting," Agent Bradley suggested. "If someone makes the shot, Mr. Brennan has to acknowledge that maybe his military experience didn't cover everything there is to know about precision shooting." The crowd was growing larger as word spread about the challenge. Water rescue demonstrations were temporarily forgotten as federal agents. Local law enforcement and facility staff gathered near the fence separating the 2 ranges. Captain Rodriguez sensed opportunity for positive publicity. "This is exactly the kind of professional excellence we support at this facility," he announced to anyone within hearing distance. Cooperation between agencies, advanced training opportunities, shared expertise. But Marina's attention was focused entirely on the technical challenge being prepared at the shooting range. Through her binoculars, she could see the razor blade. Target mounted precisely at the 500-yard line, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight like a metallic thread suspended in space. The environmental conditions were challenging but not impossible. Light crosswind from the southwest, temperature differential, creating minimal mirage effects, atmospheric pressure stable within acceptable parameters. She found herself automatically calculating the adjustments that would be necessary for a successful shot: windage compensation, elevation adjustments, hold-off points that would account for ballistic drop over the extended distance. "This should be entertaining," Brennan announced with cruel satisfaction. "When they fail, maybe people will understand the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical reality." Agent Mitchell was settling into position behind her precision rifle, a custom system configured specifically for extreme distance work. Her preparation was methodical and professional, each adjustment calculated to maximize accuracy under the challenging conditions. The first shot cracked across the desert air like thunder, A long second passed in silence before the spotter's voice came through the radio. "Miss, high and right by approximately 6 inches. Brennan's satisfaction was immediate and vocal. "See? I told you it was impossible. Even federal agents can't make shots like that when it really matters." Mitchell made adjustments and fired again. This time the bullet passed close enough to the razor blade to create a visible dust cloud, but still failed to make contact with the target. "Getting closer," Bradley observed, "but that's still not good enough for operational requirements." Marina felt something stirring deep in her chest as she watched professional marksmen struggle with a shot she knew she could make. It wasn't arrogance, it was simple recognition of capabilities, developed through years of training under conditions these agents had never experienced. "My turn," Bradley announced, taking position behind his own rifle system. His first shot was closer than Mitchell's, passing within inches of the razor blade target. His second attempt actually grazed the mounting hardware, creating a metallic ring that carried clearly across the range. "Close, but no cigar," Brennan declared with growing confidence. "That's about as good as it gets with current technology and human limitations." Marina found herself gripping the railing of her Lifeguard tower with white-knuckled intensity. These were skilled professionals doing their absolute best, but their techniques were textbook rather than adaptive. They were shooting at the target rather than becoming one with the environmental conditions that would allow the perfect shot. "Anyone else want to try?" Mitchell called out, her voice carrying frustration at having failed to achieve what should have been possible with proper technique and equipment. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from the fired shots. Marina looked around the gathered crowd, seeing faces that ranged from disappointed to smugly satisfied, depending on their investment. In the outcome, Jake Brennan was basking in vindication, having been proven right about the impossibility of the shot. Captain Rodriguez was calculating how to spin the federal agent's failure into positive publicity for his facility. The visiting professionals were discussing the technical challenges with the kind of analytical post-mortem that followed unsuccessful operations. But Marina Torres was remembering a different kind of operation, conducted in a place that didn't officially exist, where splitting a sensor wire at impossible distance had saved American lives and prevented an international incident. She was remembering the feel of a perfect trigger break and the satisfaction of watching an impossible shot find its mark exactly where physics and training said it should go. "I'll try," she heard herself saying, the words carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet crowd. The silence that followed was deeper than before, heavy with disbelief and growing awareness that something unprecedented was about to occur. Marina climbed down from her Lifeguard tower with measured steps, walking toward the fence that separated her mundane assignment from the world where her true skills belonged. Behind her, she could hear voices beginning to stir fragments of conversation that suggested the crowd was struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. The anonymous lifeguard was volunteering to attempt a shot that had defeated federal agents with years of specialized training, but Marina's attention was focused entirely on the razor blade target gleaming in the distance, and the opportunity to finally show these people exactly who they'd been dismissing as incompetent. Support staff. The moment of truth had arrived. The silence stretched across both facilities like a held breath as Marina walked toward the gate separating the pool complex from the shooting range. Every eye was tracking her movement: federal agents, local law enforcement, facility staff, and visiting dignitaries who had come to observe professional excellence and were now witnessing something entirely unexpected. "Hold on there, Torres," Captain Rodriguez called out, his voice sharp with anxiety and authority. "You're not authorized to leave your assigned area during operational hours." Marina paused at the fence line, her hand resting on the gate latch. The restriction was technically valid, but obviously motivated by Rodriguez's desire to prevent further embarrassment to his carefully orchestrated event. She could comply with the order and return to her tower, maintaining the safe anonymity that had protected her for weeks. Or she could step through that gate and finally show these people exactly who they'd been dismissing as incompetent support staff. Sergeant Chen requested my assistance with federal evaluation protocols. Marina replied calmly, technically accurate if creatively interpreted. I'm responding to official requests from visiting agencies. Chen, who had been observing the exchange with sharp professional interest, stepped forward to provide cover. That's correct, Captain. Miss Torres has specific knowledge that's relevant to our assessment procedures. Rodriguez found himself trapped between his desire to control Marina's actions and his reluctance to openly contradict a federal agent's operational requirements. Political calculation warred with personal animosity as he weighed the potential consequences of either choice. This is highly irregular, he said finally, but his tone suggested capitulation rather than continued resistance. Marina opened the gate and stepped onto the shooting range, feeling the familiar transition from administrative theater to professional environment. The difference was immediate and profound here. Competence was valued over compliance. Results mattered more than procedures. And excellence was recognized rather than punished. Agent Mitchell approached with obvious curiosity, studying Marina's bearing and movement with the analytical eye of someone trained to assess capabilities quickly and accurately. Ma'am, I'm Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, FBI. Are you saying you believe you can make this shot? I'm willing to attempt it, Marina replied carefully, aware that her next words would determine whether this remained a casual demonstration or became something far more significant. I have some experience with precision shooting. Jake Brennan had followed the group to the range, his earlier confidence now tinged with uncertainty as he watched Marina examine the target setup with obvious familiarity. This is ridiculous, he announced loudly. She's a pool lifeguard, not a trained marksman. Someone's going to get hurt when she tries to handle equipment she doesn't understand. Agent Bradley was checking safety protocols, ensuring that downrange areas were clear and that all participants understood the potential dangers involved. Ma'am, this is a precision rifle system configured for extreme distance work. The recoil characteristics and ballistic properties are significantly different from recreational firearms. Marina nodded respectfully while internally noting that the weapon was actually less sophisticated than systems she'd used routinely during her operational career. I understand the safety requirements. I'll follow all established protocols. As she approached Mitchell's rifle, Marina felt muscle memory older than her current assignment taking control. The weapon was well maintained and properly configured, though set up for someone with different physical dimensions and shooting preferences. She would need to adapt her technique to work within the system's limitations, while maintaining the precision necessary for success. The conditions are challenging, Mitchell warned, consulting her environmental monitoring equipment. Variable crosswind, temperature differential affecting mirage patterns, and atmospheric pressure that's borderline for consistent ballistics. Marina was already reading the same conditions through visual cues that electronic instruments couldn't measure. Dust particle movement at different elevations, vegetation response patterns that indicated wind direction changes. The way sound carried across the range revealing air density variations. These were skills developed through years of practical application, where electronic equipment was either unavailable or unreliable. I understand the conditions, she replied. Kneeling beside the rifle to begin her preparation process, the crowd had grown larger as word spread about the unprecedented demonstration. Water rescue exercises were completely forgotten as federal agents. Local law enforcement and facility personnel gathered to witness either spectacular success or embarrassing failure. Captain Rodriguez stood at the fence line with obvious anxiety, clearly torn between hope that Marina would vindicate his facility's training standards and fear that her success would raise uncomfortable questions about her qualifications for lifeguard duty. Tommy Walsh, the college student who worked part-time at the pool, was staring at Marina with obvious confusion. "I don't understand," he said to anyone within hearing distance. "She's always been so quiet. I mean, she's good at the lifeguard stuff, but this is completely different." Sergeant Chun was watching Marina's preparation with the sharp attention of someone whose professional instincts were fully engaged. The economical efficiency of Marina's movements, the systematic way she approached the technical challenge, the unconscious competence that spoke of extensive training, these were indicators that suggested capabilities far beyond what her current assignment would require. Doc Marina settled into position behind the rifle, her body forming the stable platform that precision shooting demanded. The weapon still didn't fit her perfectly, but she'd adapted her technique to work within its constraints. Her breathing settled into the slow rhythm that would provide the foundation for an accurate shot. Through the scope, the razor blade target appeared as a thin vertical line suspended in space, barely visible against the desert background despite the powerful magnification. At 500 yards, even the slightest environmental factor could throw a bullet off course by several inches, more than enough to result in a complete miss. But Marina wasn't just seeing the target. She was reading the entire ballistic environment, synthesizing information about wind patterns, atmospheric density, temperature gradients, and terrain features that would affect the bullet's flight path over the long journey to the target. The crowd behind her had grown quiet, perhaps sensing that something significant was about to happen. Marina could feel their attention like physical weight, but her focus was entirely on the technical challenge ahead. "Any day now," Brennan called out, but his voice carried less confidence than before. Something about Marina's professional preparation was beginning to undermine his certainty about the outcome. Marina ignored him, her entire being focused on the target and the conditions between her position and the distant razor blade. She felt the wind pattern beginning its cycle, watched thermal effects shift as afternoon temperatures created convection currents, noted the way atmospheric pressure seemed to change with subtle variations in sound quality. The moment of stillness came exactly when her experience told her it would, a brief window when all the variables aligned in her favor. Her breathing stopped at the natural pause between inhale and exhale. Her trigger finger applied pressure with mechanical precision that had been perfected through thousands of practice repetitions and dozens of life-or-death applications. The rifle roared, its muzzle blast echoing off the surrounding hills like thunder. The recoil drove into her shoulder with significant force, but Marina absorbed the impact perfectly, maintaining her sight picture to observe the bullet's flight through the scope. 500 yards was a long way for any projectile to travel. Physics and environmental factors had nearly 2 seconds to work their influence on the bullet's path. Marina lay motionless behind the rifle, her experience telling her the shot had been true, but knowing that confidence meant nothing until the target confirmed success or failure. The silence stretched across the range like a held breath. Electronic equipment beeped softly as spotters checked their instruments. Binoculars were raised to examine the distant target. The crowd waited with the kind of tense anticipation that accompanied moments of absolute truth. Then Agent Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio, clear and stunned. "Perfect split. Clean impact on both sides of the blade. The bullet went exactly down the middle." The silence that followed was deeper than before, heavy with disbelief and growing awareness that something unprecedented had just occurred. Marina remained in position, her eyes still pressed to the scope, watching the razor blade target that now showed 2 distinct impact points on either side of where the blade had been mounted. She'd known the shot was perfect from the moment she'd squeezed the trigger, but confirmation still brought the familiar satisfaction of a mission accomplished under impossible conditions. Behind her, she could hear voices beginning to stir, fragments of conversation that suggested the crowd was struggling to process what they'd witnessed. But Marina Torres was no longer the anonymous lifeguard who could be dismissed and mocked. She was something else entirely, and everyone present was beginning to understand that they'd been watching a master demonstrate her craft. Marina rose gracefully from her prone position, her movements controlled and professional, as she engaged the rifle safety and began the process of making the weapon secure for return to its owner. Her face showed no emotion, no sign of the satisfaction. She felt at having silenced her critics so definitively, but the crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. How was that even possible? Agent Bradley stammered, lowering his binoculars with obvious disbelief. "I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that." Agent Mitchell was staring at Marina with an expression that mixed awe with growing suspicion. "Ma'am, that shot requires a level of training and experience. That goes far beyond recreational shooting. That's world-class precision marksmanship." Marina handed the rifle back to Mitchell with the same calm professionalism she'd shown throughout the demonstration. "You were right about the environmental conditions being challenging," she said quietly. "But your compensation calculations were based on surface readings only. You didn't account for the thermal layer at mid-range or the pressure differential near the target." The technical explanation was delivered in the same tone she might have used to discuss weather conditions, but its implications were staggering. This level of environmental analysis required years of advanced training and practical experience that few marksmen ever achieved. "Jake." Brennan was staring at her with an expression of stunned disbelief. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. The cruel amusement had drained from his face, replaced by something approaching fear as he realized the magnitude of his mistake in challenging someone whose capabilities he couldn't even comprehend. "How?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Marina could respond, Sergeant Chun stepped forward with the sharp focus of someone whose professional instincts had just been confirmed. "Miss Torres, might I ask where you received your marksmanship training?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the fired shot. Marina looked around the range, seeing faces that had transformed from mockery to confusion to something approaching. Oh, these people were trying to reconcile the anonymous lifeguard they'd dismissed with the precision shooter who had just accomplished something they believed impossible. "Various assignments," Marina replied, using the same non-answer she'd given before. But now the words carried different weight, suggested depths of experience that hadn't been apparent when she'd been hiding behind a lifeguard whistle. Chun's winter blue eyes were studying Marina's face with laser intensity. "Various assignments in what capacity? Because what you just demonstrated isn't something you learn in basic training or recreational shooting courses." The crowd was pressing closer, sensing that they were on the verge of understanding something significant about the woman they'd been watching for weeks without really seeing. Captain Rodriguez was pushing through the group, his face red with anxiety and confusion. "Torres, what the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Marina felt the weight of multiple gazes, aware that her next words would determine the direction of this conversation and potentially the rest of her carefully constructed new life. The safe path would be to deflect, to maintain the anonymity that had protected her from uncomfortable scrutiny. But as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, professionals who understood excellence when they witnessed it, people who could recognize the difference between competence and mastery, Marina realized she was tired of hiding. "I was a contractor," she said finally, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet range. "Specialized operations. Places and missions that don't officially exist." The admission hit the crowd like a physical force. Agent Mitchell's eyes widened with recognition and growing understanding. "Contractor for whom? What kind of operations?" "The kind where missing your target isn't an option," Marina replied. "Where the margin of error is measured in lives rather than points on a scorecard." Sergeant Chun was nodding slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in her analytical mind. The technical knowledge you demonstrated about environmental factors, the way you read conditions that our instruments couldn't measure. That's operational experience, isn't it? Marina met her gaze steadily. 12 years of operational experience in environments where electronic equipment was either unavailable or unreliable. You learned to read terrain and atmospheric conditions, the same way others read books. Jesus Christ, Agent Bradley whispered. You're talking about combat operations. Real deal, life and death shooting. The crowd was processing this revelation with varying degrees of shock and understanding. Tommy Walsh was staring at Marina as if seeing her for the first time, struggling to reconcile the quiet lifeguard who'd been checking pool chemicals with someone who'd conducted classified military operations. But it was Jake Brennan's reaction that drew everyone's attention. His face had gone pale, and his hands were trembling slightly as the full magnitude of his behavior over the past weeks became clear. He'd been mocking and dismissing someone whose operational record made his own military experience look like summer camp. I didn't know, he stammered. I mean, how was I supposed to know? Marina looked at him with the same professional neutrality she'd maintained throughout his campaign of harassment. You weren't supposed to know. That was the point. Captain Rodriguez was struggling to process the implications of having a world-class operator working as a municipal lifeguard. Torres, if you have this kind of background, what the hell are you doing checking chlorine levels at a public pool? The question cut to the heart of everything Marina had been trying to avoid discussing. She could feel the crowd's attention focusing on her, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of the obvious disconnect between her capabilities and her current assignment. Sometimes people with inconvenient knowledge get reassigned to positions where they can't cause problems for their superiors, she said carefully. Sometimes the people who created problems need scapegoats to protect their own careers. Agent Mitchell was taking notes now, her FBI training engaged by the implications of what Marina was describing. Are you saying you were punished for something you didn't do? That someone used you as a scapegoat to cover up their own failures? Marina hesitated, aware that she was approaching territory that might still be classified despite her unofficial exile to civilian duties. I'm saying that sometimes the official version of events differs significantly from what actually happened in the field. Sergeant Chun stepped closer, her voice dropping to a level that wouldn't carry to the entire crowd. Miss Torres, what you're describing sounds like a serious injustice. Have you tried to address this through official channels? Marina's bitter laugh carried no humor whatsoever. I tried everything through official channels. Appeals, requests for review, demands for access to operational records that would vindicate my actions. Every request was denied, every appeal dismissed, every avenue of redress blocked by classification stamps and bureaucratic stonewalling. So they buried you in a job where your skills would be wasted and your knowledge would be irrelevant, Chun concluded grimly. They buried me where I couldn't embarrass anyone by demonstrating competence that made their failures look worse by comparison, Marina corrected. The crowd was absorbing this information with growing anger on Marina's behalf. These were professional operators who understood institutional politics and bureaucratic betrayal, who recognized injustice when they saw it clearly laid out. Agent Mitchell closed her notebook and looked around the assembled group. Ms. Torres, I think you need to know that what you've described raises serious questions about misconduct by federal officials. Questions that should be investigated by people with the authority to demand answers. Marina felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for personal vindication, though that would be welcome, but for the possibility that her experience might prevent similar injustices from being inflicted on other operators who'd served their country with distinction. I'm not sure anyone wants to reopen cases that were officially closed, she said carefully. I'm not sure anyone should have a choice in the matter, Chun replied firmly. Not when we're talking about this level of institutional abuse. As the Crowd began to disperse, discussing what they'd witnessed in tones that ranged from amazed to outraged. Marina felt the weight of transformation settling on her shoulders. The anonymous lifeguard who could be safely dismissed and ignored was gone forever, replaced by someone whose story demanded attention and accountability. Change was coming, whether the people responsible for her situation were ready for it or not. But first, there would be questions. Lots of questions from people with the authority to demand answers and the power to ensure that justice, however delayed, would finally be served. The transformation began within hours of Marina's demonstration, as word of the impossible shot spread through professional networks with the speed that only extraordinary events could generate. By evening, Marina's quiet apartment had become an impromptu command center for what would become one of the most significant investigations into military contractor abuse in recent history. Sergeant Chun had made good on her promise to involve people with serious authority. The knock on Marina's door at 7 p.m. announced the arrival of Chief Inspector Michael Foster from the Defense Department's Inspector General Office, accompanied by FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez and a woman in civilian clothes whose bearing screamed senior intelligence community. "Ms. Torres, I'm Chief Inspector Foster," the lead investigator announced, displaying credentials that indicated access to the highest levels of classified information. "This is Agent Martinez and Ms. Patricia Hayes from the Defense Intelligence Agency. We understand you have information about potential misconduct involving classified operations." Marina invited them into her modest living room, noting how the three investigators moved with the professional awareness that came from years of handling sensitive cases. These weren't bureaucrats going through the motions. These were serious operators who understood the difference between administrative harassment and criminal conspiracy. "Before we begin," Hayes said, producing a thick folder marked with classification stamps, "I want you to know that as of 6 hours ago, your security clearance has been fully restored along with access to all operational records related to your case." The news hit Marina like a physical blow. For months, she'd been fighting through official channels to get her clearance restored, to gain access to the evidence that would vindicate her actions. Every request had been denied, every appeal dismissed, every avenue of redress blocked by administrative stonewalling. "I don't understand," she said quietly. Agent Martinez leaned forward slightly. "This afternoon's demonstration raised some questions about the circumstances of your reassignment. When we started pulling files, we discovered some inconsistencies in the official reports that required immediate investigation." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Marina asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Hayes opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder thick enough to suggest months of investigative work compressed into hours of intensive effort. The kind that suggests someone went to considerable effort to bury the truth about what really happened during Operation Desert Mirage. Marina's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the folder. Inside were documents she'd never seen before: intercepts, surveillance reports, forensic analyses that painted a picture very different from the one that had destroyed her career. The operation had been compromised from the beginning. Intelligence failures, political interference, and command decisions that had prioritized expediency over operational security. Marina's actions hadn't caused the mission complications. They had prevented a complete disaster that would have cost dozens of American lives and created an international incident. "This evidence has been available all along?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hidden," Inspector Foster corrected grimly. "Someone with significant influence made sure these files never saw the light of day. Someone who needed a scapegoat to cover their own failures." Marina felt a cold rage building in her chest, the kind of fury that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with justice. Delayed and denied. She'd spent months believing that she'd somehow failed, that her actions had compromised a mission and endangered lives. The truth was exactly the opposite. Who she asked. Hayes and Foster exchanged glances, a silent communication that suggested they'd reached the crucial moment of this conversation. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, David Kellner, Foster said, along with several other officials who were involved in the original mission planning and subsequent cover-up. The name hit Marina like a physical blow. Kellner had been one of the officials who'd pushed for Operation Desert Mirage, despite obvious intelligence problems. He'd been present at the briefings where operators had raised concerns about the mission timeline and threat assessment. Kellner was the one who overruled our request for additional reconnaissance time, Marina said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. He was the one who insisted we proceed with outdated intelligence because the political window for the operation was closing. Agent Martinez was taking detailed notes, her pen scratching across a legal pad with the intensity of someone building a criminal case. Ms. Torres, are you saying that the same official who helped create the conditions for mission complications was the one who arranged your punishment for those complications? That's exactly what I'm saying, Marina replied, her voice growing stronger as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. When the operation went sideways, Kellner needed someone to blame. Someone whose version of events would threaten his own career if it ever became public. Inspector Foster was reviewing documentation with the methodical precision of someone who'd built cases against high-level officials before. The evidence suggests a systematic campaign to discredit you and bury any information that would contradict the official narrative. Hayes activated a digital tablet and began displaying communications that had been classified above Marina's previous clearance level. Email exchanges between Kellner and other officials in the days following Operation Desert Mirage revealed a coordinated effort to control the narrative and ensure that blame fell on operational personnel rather than command decisions. Marina felt sick as she read the callous language used to discuss her career destruction. To these men, she hadn't been a person with years of dedicated service and a family to support. She'd been a problem to be managed, a potential threat to be neutralized through administrative warfare. The pattern extends beyond your case, Foster continued. We've identified at least 6 other operators who were similarly scapegoated when their knowledge threatened to expose command failures or political interference. 6 others? Marina asked, stunned by the scope of the conspiracy. Minimum, Hayes replied grimly. We're still uncovering the full extent of the systematic abuse. Your demonstration today was the catalyst that finally gave us the evidence we needed to move forward with formal charges. Agent Martinez closed her notebook and looked directly at Marina. Ms. Torres, we need your cooperation to ensure that everyone responsible for this conspiracy faces appropriate consequences. We need someone who understands the operational details and can help us connect the dots between the various cases. Marina looked around her modest apartment, thinking about the months of humiliation and professional exile she'd endured. The mockery from people like Jake Brennan, the systematic undermining by administrators like Captain Rodriguez, the slow erosion of her dignity and self-worth as her expertise was dismissed and her contributions ignored. But she was also thinking about the 6 other operators who'd faced similar treatment, and the unknown number of future victims who might suffer the same fate if this conspiracy was allowed to continue. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Full investigation, Inspector Foster replied. Complete review of Operation Desert Mirage and the subsequent cover-up. Identification and prosecution of everyone involved in burying the evidence, and reform of the systems that allowed this abuse to occur. Hayes leaned forward with obvious intensity. In return, full reinstatement to your previous position and rank, complete vindication of your actions, appropriate compensation for the damages you've suffered, and the opportunity to help ensure this never happens to anyone else. Marina closed the folder carefully, her mind racing through the implications of what was being offered. Justice, vindication, and the chance to return to the work she'd been born to do. But also exposure, scrutiny, and the inevitable backlash from people with the power to destroy careers and reputations. "There's something else you should know," Foster added quietly. "The people who did this to you are still in positions of power. They've had months to cover their tracks and build defenses against potential investigation. Taking them down won't be easy, and they'll fight back with everything they have." Marina thought about the desert shooting range where she'd finally revealed her true capabilities, about the stunned silence that had followed her impossible shot, about the professionals who'd immediately recognized that they were witnessing mastery rather than luck. She thought about Jake Brennan's humiliation as he realized the magnitude of his mistake in dismissing someone whose operational record made his own military experience look trivial. Most of all, she thought about the 6 other operators who'd been destroyed by the same conspiracy, and the future victims who might be saved if someone was finally willing to fight back. "I'm in," she said firmly. "When do we start?" Inspector Foster smiled grimly. "We already have. Arrest warrants are being prepared as we speak. By tomorrow morning, Deputy Assistant Secretary Kellner and his co-conspirators are going to discover that their days of destroying careers with impunity are over." As the investigators prepared to leave, Marina felt the weight of transformation settling on her shoulders. The anonymous lifeguard who could be safely dismissed and ignored was gone forever, replaced by someone whose story would reshape how the military treated its most elite operators. Justice was coming, and Marina Torres intended to be there to see it served. 6 weeks later, Marina stood in the witness box of a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., facing a panel of military judges whose decisions would determine not just her future, but the accountability of those who had destroyed her career. The sterile fluorescent lighting and formal atmosphere bore no resemblance to the desert shooting range where her journey back to justice had begun, but the precision required for her testimony demanded the same focus that had made her legendary. In operational circles, the courtroom was packed with media representatives, military officials, and congressional staffers whose presence indicated that this case had attracted attention at the highest levels of government. In the defendants section, Deputy Assistant Secretary David Kellner sat with his legal team, no longer projecting the confidence of someone who believed his position made him untouchable. "Miss Torres," announced Brigadier General Patricia Williams, who was presiding over the military tribunal, "you've heard the testimony presented over the past weeks regarding Operation Desert Mirage and its aftermath. Do you have anything to add to the record?" Marina stood slowly, feeling the weight of vindication and responsibility settling on her shoulders. This was her moment, not just for personal justice, but to ensure accountability for the systematic abuse that had affected multiple operators and threatened to destroy others in the future. "Your Honor, 6 weeks ago, I was sitting behind a lifeguard tower in California, being mocked by people who assumed I was incompetent support staff. That assignment wasn't accidental or routine personnel management. It was punishment designed to destroy my career and silence my knowledge of what really happened during Operation Desert Mirage." She gestured toward the evidence displays that now filled the courtroom, documents that had been buried under classification stamps for months, while her reputation was systematically destroyed. Deputy Secretary Kellner didn't just arrange my administrative exile. He orchestrated a campaign to ensure I could never challenge the false narrative that protected his political career. The testimony that followed was devastating in its precision and scope. Marina walked the tribunal through the actual events of Operation Desert Mirage, contrasting the official reports with what had actually occurred in the field. Her recall was perfect, her analysis unshakable, and her credibility enhanced by the technical expertise she'd demonstrated weeks earlier on a California shooting range. "The mission was compromised from conception," she testified. her voice carrying the controlled intensity that had once made her legendary among special operations personnel. Outdated intelligence, political pressure to meet unrealistic timelines, and command decisions that prioritized expediency over operational security. When the operation encountered problems that should have been anticipated, those responsible needed a scapegoat. Kellner's attorney attempted cross-examination, but his questions only reinforced the strength of Marina's testimony. Every answer she gave was precise, detailed, and supported by evidence that painted a picture of institutional betrayal that grew more damning by the minute. The final blow came when Chief Inspector Foster introduced testimony from the other operators who'd been similarly targeted. 6 decorated veterans, all with impeccable service records, all destroyed by the same systematic campaign to protect officials who'd failed in their duties. Your Honor, Foster concluded, what we have documented here is clear evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and abuse of power at the highest levels of military administration. These operators' careers were destroyed not because of any failure on their part, but because they represented threats to officials who had failed in their responsibilities. General Williams called for a brief recess during which Marina found herself surrounded by supporters who had traveled from across the country to witness the conclusion of her fight for justice. Sergeant Chun was there, along with several of the federal agents who'd witnessed her demonstration. Even Tommy Walsh had made the trip from California, still struggling to reconcile the quiet lifeguard he'd known with the precision operator who'd captivated a federal courtroom. When proceedings resumed, General Williams' expression was grim with the weight of institutional accountability. After reviewing the evidence presented over the past weeks, this tribunal finds clear and convincing proof of misconduct by officials charged with maintaining the integrity of our personnel systems. She turned to face Kellner directly, her voice carrying the authority of decades of military service. Deputy Secretary Kellner, you are hereby relieved of all duties pending formal criminal prosecution. Additional personnel actions will follow as this investigation expands to include all participants in this conspiracy. Marina felt a wave of vindication and relief that was almost overwhelming. Justice, so long delayed, was finally being served. But General Williams wasn't finished. Ms. Torres, this tribunal owes you an apology on behalf of the institution that failed you. Your service record speaks for itself, and the injustice you've endured is a stain on all of us who swore to protect those who serve with distinction. She paused, consulting notes before continuing. Effective immediately, you are restored to your previous rank and classification. All negative evaluations related to Operation Desert Mirage are expunged from your record. Additionally, you are being awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal for your actions during that mission actions that saved American lives, despite the negligence of those charged with supporting you. The courtroom erupted in applause, but Marina barely heard it. She was thinking about the desert shooting range where this journey had begun, about the impossible shot that had shattered her anonymity and forced the truth into the light. Furthermore, General Williams continued, you are being offered assignment to the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Operations Training Division, where your expertise can be used to develop the next generation of precision operators and ensure that the systemic failures documented in this case never occur again. Marina stood at attention, feeling the weight of vindication and new responsibility settling on her shoulders. Thank you, Your Honor, I accept. As the tribunal concluded and officials began filing out, Marina found herself approached by a familiar face. Jake Brennan stood before her, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by obvious shame and genuine remorse. Ms. Torres, he said quietly, I know an apology can't undo the things I said and did, but I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. Not just about your capabilities, but about the kind of person who deserves respect regardless of their current assignment. Marina studied his face, seeing genuine recognition of his failures rather than the shallow regret of someone caught in embarrassing behavior. Jake, the real lesson isn't about my background or capabilities. The real lesson is about institutional culture and how it can enable injustice. What matters now is whether you use this experience to ensure no one else faces similar treatment. Brennan nodded solemnly. I understand, ma'am. And I promise, no one under my supervision will ever be dismissed or mocked without me remembering this moment. As Marina walked out of the federal courthouse and into the Washington afternoon sunshine, she felt the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. The shot that had started everything, that demonstration of skill on a desert range, had led to accountability reaching the highest levels of government, but more than that, it had led to the restoration of her true identity. She was no longer the anonymous lifeguard with a whistle and clipboard. She was Marina Torres, precision operator, defender of justice, and living proof that excellence could not be buried forever. 3 months later, Marina stood at the edge of a different kind of range, not the harsh California desert where her resurrection had begun, but the pristine training grounds of the Defense Intelligence Agency's Advanced Operations School. The Virginia mountains rose around her like protective walls, and the morning air carried the scent of pine instead of chlorine and sunscreen. She was home, and she was exactly where she belonged. Ma'am, the new class is ready for orientation, reported Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, her newly assigned training partner. Walsh was young, eager, and possessed the kind of natural talent that reminded Marina of herself 15 years ago. Marina nodded, checking her watch. The morning session would begin with 12 students, all experienced operators, all convinced they understood the limits of precision shooting, all about to discover they had much to learn. How do they look, Walsh? Confident, the younger woman replied with a slight smile. Maybe too confident. Marina returned the smile. Perfect. Confidence needs to be earned, not assumed. As she walked toward the classroom building, Marina reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. The humiliation and betrayal had been transformed into purpose and professional identity. The woman who had once absorbed mockery, while checking pool chemical levels, was now responsible for training the next generation of America's most elite operators. The scandal that had followed her federal testimony had reached deep into the military establishment, resulting in reforms that would protect future operators from the kind of systematic abuse she'd endured. Most importantly, the truth about operations like Desert Mirage was now part of official record, ensuring that the sacrifices of operators in the field would never again be buried under political convenience. Marina entered the classroom to find 12 students seated at attention 8. Men and 4 women, all wearing the quiet confidence that came from proven ability under fire. She recognized some faces from operational reports, others from their growing reputations in special operations communities. Good morning, she said simply, taking her position at the front of the room. I'm Colonel Marina Torres. For the next 8 weeks, you can call me Instructor 6. A few eyebrows raised at the calcine reference, but no one spoke. They'd all heard the stories by now, the legendary operator who'd been buried in administrative obscurity only to emerge and expose a conspiracy that reached the Pentagon's highest levels. Before we begin, Marina continued, I want to address what some of you are thinking. Yes, I'm the person who made that shot at the California range. Yes, I spent several months having my expertise dismissed by people who thought they understood precision shooting. And yes, I helped bring down officials who believed they could destroy careers without consequences. She paused, letting that information settle. But none of that matters here. What matters is what you're going to learn over the next 8 weeks, and whether you're prepared to challenge everything you think you know about precision under pressure. Marina activated a wall display showing targets at various ranges and environmental conditions, not sterile training scenarios. but photographs from actual missions where accuracy had meant the difference between success and disaster. Advanced operations aren't about equipment or technique, she said, gesturing to the images. They're about developing the mental discipline to perform under conditions that would break most people. They're about reading environments that your instruments can't measure. They're about making the impossible shot when everything depends on it. As the morning progressed with assessments and baseline evaluations, Marina moved among her students with the fluid confidence of someone completely at home in her environment. She was no longer the dismissed lifeguard absorbing mockery behind a desk. She was Colonel Marina Torres, teacher of the impossible, master of the art that had defined her life. She was home, and she intended to ensure that the next generation of operators would never face the journey she'd been forced to make alone. The story that had begun with dismissal and mockery had ended with vindication and purpose. And in the morning, it would begin again with new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that excellence, properly applied, could overcome any obstacle. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and Marina Torres was exactly where she belonged, training the future guardians of American freedom with the deadly precision that made legends of those brave enough to master it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.